I think growing up, it was such a special time. And I just think there was something ingrained in us that we knew we had to help and we had to be a part of it to make it keep going. I just don't want to see Washington lose its traditions because the people there, they're pretty special.
Oh, once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know.
Welcome to Not Forgotten, a podcast brought to you by the Doc Booth Foundation and hosted by noted writer Lyman, who has chronicled the stories, culture, and character of Utah's Dixie for more than 40 years. We'd like to invite our listeners to attend our annual benefit dinner for the Doc Booth Foundation on April 25th, 2026 at 6 p.m. at the Dixie Convention Center. This year, we're honoring Ted Spilsbury, who has been a beloved pillar in this community. If you can attend or would like to donate, you can buy tickets at docboothfoundation.org. Please plan on joining us.
This is such a great day. I've really been looking forward to this episode. We have in the studio today Carmen Iverson Snow. I knew her as Carmen Iverson a long time ago, that great barrel racer and horsewoman and rodeo queen and all of those things. But your life, Carmen, has become such an amazing thing here in Utah's Dixie. And to have you in the studio today, it just brightens the studio with energy and with light and with excitement. And I'm so happy to be able to spend a few minutes with you to talk about things. You're a Washington girl. Well, first and foremost, you're a Dixie girl. But you grew up in Washington, and I just think it'd be fun maybe to start out. Have you share with us what it was like growing up in the town of Washington?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you that I was born on April Fool's. But anyway, my dad was down on the farm. Oh, another thing I've got to tell you, because you can tell if they're a true Washington or a Dixieite, if they're A's or O's, and they're O's or A's. So if you can't understand me, that's why. So he was on the farming. Anyway, and he was called and he says, "You've got twin boys in Hurricane." My mother was from Hurricane, and she was over visiting my grandma, her mother, and I decided to come. And so I was born in my grandmother's bed in Hurricane, and Dad hustled over to see his little twin boys. But to his disappointment, it was one little girl with dark hair, and I've had to live up to that all my life. So,
Well, Carmen, knowing you've had the energy and done so much in your life, probably more than even those twin boys would have done in their lives.
well, I've been busy. I have been busy, but I just find that the older we get, the less time we have to do everything that we want to get done. But I've been so fortunate to be born and raised in Washington, and the journey that I've had, I've thoroughly enjoyed.
What was it like as a little girl in town?
Oh, it was really quite exciting because we lived in Uncle Malin's basement because my dad was building our home on 200 North. And so that's where I lived till I was 3. And one thing I can really remember is the first earthquake I ever felt in Washington. And that was when all of a sudden the floor in the basement was going wavy and we were just rocking and rolling. And then I never felt another one till years and years later. Hallelujah. So it was really fun growing up, anyway, living there because I had my cousins. I had Donald and Merwin and Ralph, and then my sister Connie. And it was just really fun. I was only 3 years old, but I still remember it as yesterday.
So it was an earth-shaking experience.
It was an earth-shaking experience.
Living in Washington.
Yeah, living in Washington, yes. When we were in school, we had to practice getting under the desk for the fact that nuclear war was out there, and we were afraid of the bombs, and we knew that was going to happen any time. I really knew it because I was really scared because I'd go up to the church, and behind the whole church, there was this big old, you go up the steps, there was this place you could hide, and I'd kneel there and pray that I'd be able to ride the bus to 7th grade before the bomb came. That's a true story. And there was a gal there still is a bomb shelter in Washington. It's an underground bomb shelter, and I better not give out the name of where it's at because everybody will want it if we ever need it. But when I had the opportunity to meet with Reagan when he announced his running for presidency, I told him the story. And I says, so at the time when he said, tear down this wall, I thought he must have heard me talking to him, telling him how we used to practice about the bomb.
And so at school, when you were in school, you'd actually have little drills,
Yes.
practices.
We'd have drills and we'd get down under the desk. And, that takes us right to how the atomic bomb that was set off down here, it was our group that was called in every year to see if we had thyroid cancer. We didn't know he was being tested. We had no idea. My best friend, my neighbor, Jesslyn Turner, was one of the first ones to die of leukemia. And that was the saddest thing that ever happened. And Sheldon Nyson, he died of leukemia also from Washington, because I can still see him on his tractor with the dust blowing up in his face as he plowed. And I'm sure that's how come it took him.
My goodness.
So lots of sad stuff happens, but we learn from history, right? And Dad built our home up on the corner on 200 North, and that's where I was raised. And we had dirt roads. There was no oiled roads. I knew everybody in Washington. I knew their dogs, their cats, their horses. And it was just a time in life that, you always want to go back to. And anyway, it was really quite an adventure.
What were some of your favorite things to do?
My favorite things to do was learning how to ride a horse on our calves we raised, until the one day we were having Sunday dinner and I wondered where my calf had disappeared to. Well, I guess I was eating it. Anyway, I'm sorry about that, but that's how we lived. We lived in our garden. We lived with the gardens. My grandmother lived on the corner, and she would get little chickens every spring and raise these chickens, and they were the cutest little chicks. And anyway, but then the day came that we killed all the chickens. We would go out, and the men, do I dare say all this? They would actually, chop their heads off and take them down. And then probably Aunt Celeste would grab them by the feet and dump them in hot water. And then they'd hang them up on the clothesline. And then I had the honor of picking the feathers off of them. And anyway, that was quite an experience.
So, Carmen, you're this modern woman who lived as a little girl. You lived all of those experiences, that full circle of life that was real. I mean,
it was real. Yeah. I'd go over there, and Grandma taught me how to plant the garden. She would hoe, and then I would drop the pea seeds in and then put the water on them, and then she'd cover them up. And it was so fun to watch everything grow, and mature. And I think that's how come I learned how to plant cotton. Back then, if you had a little something to burn, you'd go across the ditch bank and you'd burn it on the ditch bank. And then afterwards, you'd get in the ditch, and we lived in the ditch. It was a rock ditch, and that's where we lived. That was our swimming pool.
Well, there was another one up the street a ways, wasn't there?
That was the boilers. Well, we called it the Warm Springs. And later it got called the boilers because it's got the 5 boilers in it. And, Mother would never let us go swimming until the snow was off Pine Valley Mountain. And as soon as the snow was off Pine Valley Mountain, we could go swimming. And me and Sandra, we'd go up there, and we'd even take that black mud and put it on our faces because we knew it'd make us beautiful and lay in the sun. But we'd wait on the corner down to Vicki Adams's corner. Do you know Vicki Adams? You remember Vicki? And we'd watch who was headed up there. And if there was any scary boys from St. George, we wouldn't go until they left. Those boys from St. George were a little scary to us. And then there was Gyro. He was this guy that did rain dances all the time. And if we knew he was up there, no way would we go up there to go swimming. But boy, we spent a lot of time in that pool.
You mentioned Sandra. That was your friend.
Sandra Staley Turnbow. She was my sidekick. She was the best friend, and today she's still my very best friend. How fortunate am I?
Well, I've got to tell you, Carmen, that mud really did its trick because you're two of the most beautiful women in this whole region.
Oh, you're so
and
sweet.
So that's pretty neat. You could probably market that mud.
I'll talk to Sandra. Maybe we can do that. there's always room for one more new thing for your woman. Oh my gosh, I never thought of that. But Sandra and I, we would get up early every morning and go bunch onions. Because, we bunched onions for Woodrow. Her dad had the onion patch and the radish anyway, we'd always sing we're the lonely little petunias in the onion patch because we would be there with all the little shivwits there bunching of onions with us. And anyway, we got a whole $1 a bundle. A bundle was 100 onions bundles we had to do every morning.
Must have been an experience working for Woodrow.
Oh my gosh, Woodrow. Yeah, but he made the best molasses candy you ever had. He knew how to make molasses candy. And to this day, I have never tasted molasses candy like he made. So it was wonderful. But Sandra and I would go to school after bunching onions, and we wouldn't possibly not have a bath. So I'm sure we didn't smell very good. But we looked good because we're mud. No, but we didn't smell very good. But to this day, I still don't like onions. So terrible.
Wow. That's an awesome memory. You were hard workers in Washington.
We worked hard. We'd go down and roll bales of hay. And at the end of the day, on a weekend, the Staley boys would drop me off and throw a bale of hay on the ground, and that was what I'd earn money for my horse. That's how I fed my horse, was my bale of hay. I'd go roll bales of hay in the fields.
Well, tell us about your horse and about your horsemanship as you were growing up.
Oh, my word. My dad was the cowboy.
Tell us your dad's name. And
Grant Iverson.
Grant Iverson, what a great guy.
He was one of the best. And that was one of the hardest things, when you lose your parents, when you watch your parents get old. And it's one of the hardest things. But Dad never got old to me till the very, very last day. And he taught me everything I knew about a horse. First, like on the calf, first riding the calf. And then he bought me this little black horse. And that horse wouldn't let anybody ride it but me. And so Dad finally got rid of it. He's afraid I was going to get hurt. And then he bought me a Shetland pony, Captain. Oh, my gosh. He come home more times without me than I came home with him because he had bucked me off up in the hills. We'd ride up by the pink hills of Washington, and me and Sandra. And it was just good times. And then he got me a Toby. And Toby was my horse that I actually barrel raced on and raced. I'd raced out the sand plot. That horse, he really put up with a lot because I expected a lot out of him.
I'm thinking that Grant thought he was going to have those twin boys, but he got Carmen and he made a cowboy out of you.
He made a cowboy out of me, and I was a cowboy, but he couldn't figure out how come I had to always put my lipstick on before I rode my horse. Because I says, Dad, you always got to look good while you're out there. And anyway, he says, Carmen, just come and go. Oh, I'll be just a minute, Dad. I'll be down. And we'd go down at the sand plot, and that's where we practiced barrel racing and such. And if I wasn't there, I was over at Sandra's window by her house. She had a 2-story house, and on my horse, I said, come on, let's get on the horse. Let's go down at the sand plot. And we'd take off and go running. And she didn't have a horse at that time, but it was her aunt out in McDermott. Eldon took me and her out, and we went with Frank. Ralph was working out there. And we went out there to get her a horse. And that was the first real cowboy town I've ever been to. It smelled like cigars. It was the first time I really smelled a cigar. I was a little naive. But anyway, Sandra got her horse, and she put in the creek down in Washington and behind their house. And it ran from the bridge clear up where the freeway is now. And her horse was used to be in a corral. But once it got loose, we could never catch it. We had spent all day long trying to catch that horse just so we could all go riding. So just a fun experience and fun memory.
Sandra also rode my old horse, Judge.
She did ride Judge. I remember her riding Judge.
And I think that really made a cowgirl out of her.
She was a cowgirl. I think we were both kind of tomboys because it seemed like in Washington, if the boys wanted to somebody on their team, they always picked me and Sandra to be on their team. But you've got to know, in our class, we only had 10 kids. There was only 10 of us going to school in the old school in Washington.
At that time?
At that time.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, we were less than 500 people.
Yeah.
I've been around a long time. It's scary. But anyway, we all went to school there, and there was 10 of us. There was Gary Millen and Robert Jolly and Delwyn Bracken and Gary Farnsworth. Let's see, Sandra Staley, myself, Shelley Stevens. Remember Shelley? Arla Kay, August, and Jamie Ortloff. Poor Jamie. She was the only non-little LDS girl there, and we had never knew that even existed. I can remember the day I found out the president wasn't a Mormon. I was so shocked because I thought, because that's the community we lived in. No? And anyway.
That's so awesome that you can name your whole class.
Oh, I hope I didn't leave anybody out.
Well, I'm sure they're in your heart one way or the other. And that's
Yuma Meals, I'm sorry.
wonderful. It's just awesome to think that. And I'm trying to think, could I name everyone in my class? That's really amazing. Your sister Sharon is my age, and we rode and rodeoed together and grew up together. And I knew your dad, and what a great fellow he is. And I have an idea of that great family of yours. It's just so awesome how you share all of this, because that's an idyllic childhood.
It truly was. I mean, you just have to imagine you'd come home from school and your mother, my mother, Grace Iverson Snow, she would always have fresh bread cooked, and she'd be at the ironing board. And then she'd have a bottle of Pepsi, right there on the counter. And I'd always get a fresh, hot piece of bread and tell her what I'd done all day long. And then she'd pull out the little breadboard so I could tap dance on it to show her how I was learning how to tap dance. And when my sister was born, Sharon, 7 years younger than me, that was really fun to have her come into our life. It kind of changed my little world because Connie was the oldest, and then I was the second child. And I was kind of the spoiled one, I think. But I had to kind of let go and let Sharon get some of the ray of sun while she was there with her beautiful bright red hair.
Yes, and that's so awesome because you're dark-haired and she's red-headed.
Connie was platinum blonde.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I used to always say, my dad was a truck driver, which he was, and gone a lot. No, but his sisters were all the very same.
Really?
Aunt Wanda Stevens, she was blonde. Fayon was dark, and Aunt Celeste was redhead.
If you look at all of us who are sort of native here and we look at our ancestry, we come from so many different backgrounds. I mean, there's probably that Scottish redhead back there and the German, and all of that kind of comes together in our genes.
Yeah, we're Danish. Hans Peter Iverson is who got us here. But I would have never been here if my dad wouldn't have married my mother, though. Because he told me, he says, I'd have never got married if Grace wouldn't have married me. He came back from World War II and hunted her down.
Oh, really?
Yes. And it was just his love story. He had a picture of Mom in the hallway, and every time he walked by it, he kissed it. He just literally adored my mother, and they adored each other. And I think that carries on through us to learn respect and love for our parents, don't you think? And our loved one, and our own. I've been married to Stanley for 58 years. He was my childhood sweetheart.
So tell us about you and Stan.
Oh, my gosh. He's a character, and I love him. I don't know. I could not do anything that I have done throughout my life if it wouldn't have been for Stan. His support. He's been behind me 100%.
And his roots are as deep here as anyone's.
They are. He's a St. George boy. And Sandra got me on a blind date with him. My Sandra got me on a blind date with Stanley. But he had dated Sandra first, and he had dated several girls for Shelley Stevens and Patricia Price. And anyway, I was the lucky one that ended up with him.
Tell us how the two of you have worked as a team and some of the things that he's done in his life.
Well, first of all, his dad and my dad drove truck together on Rocky Mountain. And that's how he saw those two work as a team. And that's where I really met Stanley for the first time when I was a little girl. And so I've known Stanley all my life. But he's the type that wants to be in the background. He doesn't want to be out front. He doesn't want to be seen. But he has accomplished so much in his life. And from having a service station to learning how to drive truck, to working for Host Transportation, to buying into it, and then to go on his own. And partner, Don Ipson called him one night. He was really down and out. And Stanley said, come on over, I'll give you some tires for your truck. And they got talking and they decided to start their own trucking company. And they started Dat's Trucking. And there was some few other people that were involved. The newbies were involved in that. And we eventually bought them out and went forward. And then they started Overland Petroleum. And so there's Dat's Trucking and Overland Petroleum. They were together. And they worked so good as a team. They were the best partners because of the fact Stanley wanted to be in the background. And you know where Don is, Senator Ibsen. But I don't think people really realize it was Stanley. Stanley was the man. And Stanley is the man in my eyes. And he really made it all happen. And I'm so proud of him because when he retired, he gave everything over to his kids. And now he's watching his kids go forward with what they're doing, and they're doing wonderful things. They built that new area where Whammers is, and then the grandkids are running Whammers. They've got Whammers. And then, like I said, Stanley's out there. They've got a car wash. He's out there cleaning the car wash. He's just in the back of the scenes, but that's just Stan. But anything I did or anything I asked of him, he'd always say, why not? And I'll be honest with you, the money that he has given to the community, that nobody has an idea, that just for the good of the community. It wasn't for anything else, but for the good of the community.
And that's just such a great classic Dixie story. You go back to where he started with a service station, and then I would just love to have been there that night when he and Don Ibsen got together and been a fly on the wall for that conversation, because we can now see the big picture of what that became. And it's so awesome. But it really is an example of how we take the resources we were given here in this community and build them into something so great. That's a neat thing. And like you say, Stan is he's quiet and behind the scenes, but he's made a huge difference in this community.
Impact, and a huge impact on his family. And his boy Darren, he's gone on, the people that bought Dat's, he's been working for them, and he's done such a wonderful job. Darren has. He's amazing.
And again, just that idea of hard work. People see the fruits of what people accomplish, but they don't realize how much hard work is behind the scenes of all of that.
There's so much hard work. It's amazing, but it's worth it. But we played hard too, so how's that?
Well, and that's an important part of it as well. Bring us up to, well, we can't pass up the cowgirl stuff until you tell us about being Dixie Roundup Queen and all of those things, and then maybe how you and Stan have come forward.
Who does not love the Dixie Roundup? Ever since I was a little girl and was riding, Dad took me to every rodeo. And I never got dunked in the thing because I always had my Lions Club pin on, how they used to do it up on the boulevard, up on Main Street. And anyway, I'm trying to, I just would look at those queens and that was my dream. I put that out there. I was going to be a Dixie Roundup queen, if nothing else. And when I became princess, I thought, I'm getting there. And when I became queen, I remember I was working at the A&W with all the Washington girls, and Rick Miles came driving around there. He said, there's the Dixie Roundup queen. And I was just beamed. I was so proud. But it was such an honor to represent the St. George Lions and the area down here, because that was one thing that if you could be that, you would really hit your goal in life.
And as I think about it, you and Sandy both achieved that.
Yes, but Sandra went ahead and became Miss Rodeo Utah, and I was so proud of her. I went the year before. I came home without the crown, but then Sandra went up and got the crown, and it was such a proud moment. I felt like I had got it, even though it was her that got it. Do you know what I'm saying? Because I was so proud of her.
That's really neat.
Yeah, we rodeoed together. Oh, you remember the high school rodeos? Oh my gosh, we started them, remember, down here. And the first trip to Tremonton, Dad, all we had was this little teeny one-horse trailer that Dad had borrowed. We didn't have one. And we were all morning long trying to get Toby to get in that. He would not load.
Oh, really?
I was sitting on the fence crying because we wasn't going to the rodeo. But we went up and we competed and we did. I lost the barrel race by 1/10 of a second for first place up there, which I thought was pretty spectacular for the state. And I was right there in the running for the little high school rodeo queen, so it was fun.
That was a long way to Tremont from Washington.
I didn't think it was ever going to get there. I ordered a chicken fried steak. This is the funniest thing in Tremont. We went to breakfast. I ordered chicken fried steak, and it came. I says, "Well, I ordered chicken." I first chicken fried steak I'd ever had. I was still a small town girl.
That's great. That's great. Well, so Carmen, you grew up. You must have grown up, whether you realized it or not, with a really strong sense of history or that affinity to the stories and the history of your town and this area. When did that really start to manifest into the kinds of things that you've done?
First of all, I started the youth council 14 and a half years ago, and I just barely stepped away last year, which was the hardest thing for me to do, but I knew it was time. And they needed somebody younger to be in there with them. And at that time, we were meeting at the city offices at the courthouse in Washington, and for a year. And then the city purchased the Covington home on the auction block for $165,000. And I went to him and I says, if we can meet in the basement of the Covington home and clean it up and bring it back to museum quality and do tours, would you let us meet in that basement? And they said yes. And so we gathered Sherry Staley, Tate, you know Sherry. She come on board with me, and we went around and we gathered stuff. The kids went in the middle of July, cleaned that house. It was just like spiders and cockroaches and lizards. And honestly, it was so filthy. But they worked their little tails off, I'll have to say that, and cleaned the Covington home. And then they learned the stories. Then I started digging into the stories of the home.
Carmen, take us back to what the Covington home is and what it means to the history of Washington.
Well, this is what's so exciting about it. It's the oldest standing home in Washington County, the oldest standing home. And it's got so much history because that's where the Covingtons came. And, well, actually, the Adair family came 10 days before, 10 families, and then 2 weeks later, the Covingtons 28 families came, and they lived at Adair Springs because that was the only thing that was green and had any water or any grass. But Adair Springs was called after the Adairs because they came. And they lived in their buckboards there and built little huts in the side of the hill for 2 years. And then
And the Adair Springs was where?
Adair Springs is just a half a block below where the Covington home is right now. And it's still running water. It's still there. But it's capped off. The city's capped it off. But the Covington home they were there in 1857. They built the home in 1859. They gathered all the stone from the Curry that's up by the new elementary in Washington, which is really an old elementary now. And that's where all the stone, and the Everett twins helped them build it.
So that home existed. It had been built. It's an awesome home, built of stone.
Yes.
1859. So that was 2 years, close to 3 years before the folks came to St.
Before
George.
the Muddy River group.
And that's pretty amazing to think of that. And I think a lot of times we forget that you have a way of pointing out that Dixie started in Washington.
It did start in Washington.
And it's true. That's where it began. And that home, it's so wonderful that it's still there and that you've restored it and that it's available now. But tell us more about the Covington family and why were they here?
Well, they were living in Cottonwood in Salt Lake. He was a professor at that time, and he had I could tell you. Let's see. I don't want to tell you all the story because you're going to have to come to the Covington home on my tour. But they were called on the Dixie Cotton Mission from Brigham Young because Bruce Anderson's great-great-grandmother from Tennessee she had a stage stop on the Buckhorn between here and Salt Lake, and she had brought these cotton seeds with her from Tennessee, and she gave them to the people that came down, and they planted them, and they grew, and John D. Lee could see how they grew in Santa Clara, And he went back to Brigham Young and says, we can grow cotton down here because it's really everything's perfect to grow cotton. And they needed to do that because the Civil War was starting up and they couldn't get the textiles over here, and we had to be on our own. So he called the Covingtons, the families. They were all Southerners, and they all had plantations at one time in Mississippi, and they knew how to grow cotton. So they were called down to do the cotton mission.
So Robert Dockery Covington and others
Yes.
were former plantation
Yes.
owners.
Southerners.
Southerners who had joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and had come to Salt Lake City. Mm-hmm. And they were already settled in the Salt Lake Valley at Cottonwood.
Beautiful places, beautiful homes. And, well, the homes back there were beautiful too. But, in the gardens. And you can just imagine as a woman, like Melinda that I play every once in a while from Kentucky. Anyway, as a woman, you had to leave everything behind and only bring necessities. And that's what they did. They had to leave everything. And they were only here for the first year, all it was left was about 20 families because a lot of them couldn't do it.
Let me just go back because for our podcast, we used the George Hicks song, Once I Lived in Cottonwood.
Uh-huh.
And
I love that song.
And that very first line applies perfectly to Robert Dockery Covington. Once he lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm, but he was called to Dixie, which caused him much alarm. But he had already left, is it Mississippi?
Yes.
And the plantation there, and had joined the church and come west. And then he brought his expertise in cotton growing to Washington.
Yeah, he was a bishop. I mean, he was an outstanding man because he was so smart, but he was a man that was a giving and the hospitality. I mean, he was just open to people. But he said thee and thou a lot. And he did smoke tobacco because he was from the South, because they smoked tobacco. And when Brigham Young come down, he said, I cannot believe you guys are smoking tobacco. And he says, if you're going to smoke it, you're not buying it from the Gentiles. You're going to grow your own. So they grew 3 acres of tobacco in Washington. I don't know where that is. I'd like to find where those acres were, just curiosity's sake. But Brigham Young spent a lot of time at that home because that was the only home to stay in. Him and John D. Lee's. So it was either John D. Lee's or the Covington home.
And John D. Lee's home was?
Right down the corner.
And is that home?
It's gone. But my grandfather, Hans Peter Iverson, bought John D. Lee's home and the Covington home way back when. Huh. And for $1,000. Oh. I mean, that was a lot of money back then. And then it turned into the Presbyterian Church, John D. Lee's home was for a while.
You've alluded in the past to how well those settlers got along with the Southern Paiute people in Washington. And what do you attribute that to?
Well, I attribute it to is because as we came, we didn't come in as a threat. We came in welcoming them to our campfire, and they felt like they could work with us and be with us. And the Shinabakai, which is called Shinabakabi, is what they call it, the Great Spirit Mountain. That's where they spend a lot of time. And because we came so late in the spring, we couldn't really plant. All they could do was just get the ground ready and dig the ditches and get all that going on. And they actually taught us how to plant corn. The Paiute Indians did. And so that's one way we really learned how to work the soil because they knew, they have such a, sacred feeling towards the ground. Uh-huh. And they taught us how to plant and how to work that ground because it had so much alkali in it.
And Shinabkai, at least that's how I've always it really is part of Washington. It's down in the Washington fields and is now surrounded by homes at the foot. But it always was and still is a sacred place for the Paiute.
It really is.
And I love the story that Carl Larson tells about Robert Dockery Covington, Bishop Covington, when he was sitting on the hillside there above the river, and one more dam had washed out, and he's sitting there going, oh no, how are we ever going to be able to survive here. We've got to be able to dam this river and irrigate. And then he looked around at all the black rock everywhere and said, well, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically realized, well, what a blessing it is. We've got plenty of rock to build dams with.
That Virgin River was something else. And, well, they finally conquered it. Hallelujah, huh? But, in fact, when they first came down here, they actually moved down there for a minute by the river. But the mosquitoes and everything was so bad, it sent them back up to Adair Springs. But I don't know. I just can't believe how they sacrificed and what they did.
They really did live in the most dire poverty you can imagine for the first several years.
They did. They did. It was, and like I said, so many of them went back.
Yeah.
And the sacrifices they had to make and the sickness that they had and how many people died because of the sickness. And the Gardner family, when Brigham Young sent them down, Robert Gardner, he came and, you know, if they'd come to town, everybody would run out and meet somebody because they were so tickled to see somebody coming. And he couldn't believe it when he saw them because everybody was dressed in blue. Their skin was blue. They looked sickly. They were sickly, a lot of them. And he says, I am not bringing my family down here. But everybody was in blue because they had wore out all their clothes, you know, and they had made their own material out of their cotton, which went really well at the cotton mill, and they dyed it with dockweed, and it was all blue.
So that's amazing to imagine, because those families that came to settle St. George, they came through Washington on their way, and they encountered the folks there who were really not in very good shape at that time.
They weren't.
And like you said, Robert Gardner's going, wait a minute, is this what we're in for? And yet it's those folks at Washington that really set the stage and the foundation for everything else to happen here.
You know, they truly did. And I think that day when Mr. Covington and Robert Gardner knelt and prayed, he decided, I can bring my family here. And he was down in less than a month, and he brought his family. And Sherry Lou Tate, her mother was a gardener, Catherine, so that's what got Catherine's family down here, or we wouldn't have got Sherry down. I don't know, isn't it fun? It's just so interesting how it all comes together, how we're all related.
And again, Carmen, I look at you and I go, okay, you could be doing anything with your life right now. You could be traveling around the world or be doing anything, but you are so focused on the history and preserving the history. And where did that come from? Where did that sense of commitment to the history of this area come from?
I've always loved history, but like I said a little while back about the Covington home, when I started diving into the history, and because I wanted the youth to learn it, and so I gave them each one of the children to portray at the Covington home on the tours, so they learned the story. I wanted them to realize it wasn't what it is today, that how people sacrificed to get it to where it is today. And it was just a joy to watch them lighten up and get an excitement about the history. And then I just wanted to dig deeper, and I just kept looking. And you'd get on the computer or you're getting books, and all of a sudden hours were gone. And you thought, okay, I can't do this all the time. But then George and Kathy, you know, when I retired from the youth council, I've been a volunteer for 100 years. I actually was in retail, and I managed piquettes. I was the district supervisor over 5 stores and ran piquettes for years. And when I got expecting a child, Daphne, my little girl, which I didn't know until I had her, I decided I just started all over. I started all over in the Sunbeams. I started all over in the school, starting PTA, and my life just completely changed. And I think that's when my life changed, was when I stopped working, when I retired and became a professional volunteer. And so when George and Kathy came to me...
You're talking about George and Kathy Staley.
Yes, true hearts of Dixie. And I just love those two. And they started the museum 25 years ago in Washington. And they're to the point in their life that they knew it was time to step away. And they asked me if I'd be interested in, and guess what I said? why not? Of course. But then I didn't realize what it was all going to entail. But anyway, it's wonderful because now
Love
we
to have
closed
you
the
share that.
museum for 3 months because we had the weavers in there. Weavers. That wasn't Mel Weaver. That was the weavers that was weaving quilts, blankets, and stuff. Anyway, they left, and we talked to George. Really wanted to honor the Shivwits and the Paiutes, and he wanted that room to be specifically about them. And Kelly Paxman was the director on the museum board, and he considered putting his collection in there, his mom and dad's collection in there. And we were still really nervous about it, but we had to redo the floors. We pulled the old chalkboard off, and then behind the old chalkboard was another old chalkboard. And when we pulled it off, the whole wall came down almost. So we had to replaster, redo the floors. I mean, paint.
This is in the old school.
This is in the old
Washington
school that was built in 1909 that Cuba Lyle, Jerry Atkin's grandmother, she was married to a Hall, and then she married a Lyle, and her daughter was Joy Atkin. Remember Joy? Those such beautiful people. And she was on the city council in Washington, and she went to the school board, and she was the one that got the park and the school for $1 from the Washington School District. And then Mill Creek was there for a minute, and then George and Kathy and Gail Cooper Smith, excuse me, she was married to Hiram Smith. They had gathered up all this Murdoch antiques and artifacts, and they were looking for a place for it, and they went to the city and asked if they could use the museum. So they were there for 25 years. So now we're redid it after 25 years, trying to get George's vision and his dream of what for the Shivwits, and we extended it, and honestly, it turned out quite amazing.
Well, it's so awesome that, number one, that the school is still there.
Yes,
and the school where you and your 10 classmates went to school.
Yes, and where Victor Iverson taught us that if we chewed gum, he hit us on the head with we had the trash cans were tall. They were like 4 feet tall, and I don't even know how he lifted it up and hit us on the head, or we chewed cayenne pepper or whatever.
But the school, there's the auditorium, a really wonderful auditorium, and then the museum was established upstairs, and now you've reopened the museum and redone it thanks to countless hours on your part and so many other people.
I've got this wonderful committee. Of course, Sandra's on my committee, Nancy McAllister, my sister Sharon, Darcy Hanson, Sherry Lou Tate, Rosie Kirkland. Oh, my word, I couldn't have done it without Rosie because Rosie is in construction and she knew who to call and who to go to when I was sitting there crying on the floor, wondering what was going to do with that wall. And Kelly Paxman and Mike Harless that loves history. He's president of the Historical Society over there. And Kathy and George. And who am I going to leave? Oh, Jody Worthington, Jody Iverson, Dennis Iverson's daughter. These are people that love Washington, that love history. And they got down on their hands and knees. They scrubbed, they carried, we lifted. We called on so many different people because we're not kids anymore, darn it. But the youth council, they even came in and helped me move stuff around. And honestly, it was a project. So it took all of us to do it.
So you've done all that with all those great people. You've done what you've done at the Covington home, which you've taken such an initiative there, Carmen. Tell us more about that as well.
Well, I told Mayor Crest Daly he couldn't take that away from me. Even though I wasn't in the youth council anymore and the youth council weren't meeting there, I still do the tours. And I do it as Melinda Covington from Kentucky. She was the 9th of 14 children. And she didn't get married till later in life. And she married her third cousin. She didn't care because he came back from the Black Hawk War. And he was so handsome. Anyway, I could go on, but I love to do tours there. We've done it for the DUP. We've done it for the Sons of the Pioneers. We've done Leadership Dixie. We do them for family reunions. We do them. All they have to do is just call me. But I would love people to they could contact me at the museum if they want to do a tour.
I keep coming back to this, Carmen, but again, there must be something in you that It must go all the way back to your childhood in Washington that has kept you right there.
Well, I think growing up, like I said, it was such a special time. And I have to go back to Quentin Nyson, because Quentin, he was Washington. He really was. And with the young kids growing up back then, he set such a thing in our hearts that how the traditions and how much we loved that town and loved everything about it. From 4th of July's when he would drive around with his band playing and firing off his cannon and waking us up, and the music blasting from the store, because every holiday the music was playing as you went down to the park to celebrate. And he taught people how to volunteer and how to serve. And I just think there was something ingrained in us that we knew we had to help and we had to be a part of it to make it keep going. And that's what I really want to see. I just don't want to see Washington lose its traditions. I don't want to lose that small town feel, because the people there, they're pretty special. I could name off all the names of the people there that have done so much for the community and kept the community alive. And to forget them, that would be just a shame.
It strikes me that one of the ways that you're keeping all that alive and that you have kept it alive is through the creation of the monuments that are there as well.
Well, of course, I had to put Melinda up. The youth council and I raised money for that, and so did a lot of people in the community. And the city gave us some RAP tax money and helped it. And it was where John D. Lee was supposed to have gone, and it was empty. And I thought, we need somebody shoulder to shoulder with these men, because these women gave so much, and they worked just as hard as the men. And I'm not going to be prejudiced, but probably sometimes harder, because their days were never done. Remember, when she was married to Mr. Covington and they were just having their first child, he went on a mission in the South. He didn't know his child till she was 7 years old. He was gone for 7 years. And Melinda had to raise her family, she wasn't quite the pretty little bride when he got back, but anyway, that's what I'm saying. They had to sacrifice, and I just felt like it was important that we did that, and we wanted to leave something behind from the youth council, and so that's why we did her statue. We first bought it from Jerry Anderson, had a small statue, and the youth council bought that one and put in the Covington home just to have there, and then we got bigger ideas, so we went for the bigger one. And then, I love the history and the stories. I got in touch with Eric Daddle, and I asked him if he'd paint the puzzle, the painting of Washington. And he did, and he did a beautiful job. And he says, it's got 65 stories in the puzzle. Anyway, he brought 65 stories. He says, Carmen, this is the most stories I've ever put in a puzzle in my life. And I says, well, Eric, but when I was in the state PTA, I was state PTA president, he was a membership chair, and he did one for the state PTA, and all the money that was sold for it is called the Carnival. It all went back to the PTAs across the state. But anyway, so he did this for us, and yes, it still costs because, we've all got to make some money. But every puzzle we sell, every single one, every penny goes back to the museum, so to keep it going. And anyway, the stories in it are just hilarious. But then I called a committee together before of all the local people. I says, what stories do you want in this puzzle? And they helped. Then I think it was the 150th anniversary of Cotton Days. Sherry says, I wish we had Quentin standing on the corner waving, welcoming people to town. Well, that kind of got in my head. And I decided, how many years later? And I still was thinking about that. I thought, we're going to do Quentin. I went to him and I said, would you do Quentin Nyson? He says, I love Quentin. Of course I'd do Quentin. He says, I just turned 90, though, this year. That was a year ago. Sorry, Jerry, I told your age. And he looks like a teenager. But anyway, so I went ahead and said, let's do it. And then I went to the city afterwards asking forgiveness. But you know what? They gave some money for it, but the majority of the money came from the community. Every single penny. And the money that they gave us, we are saving because we really want to move him to the corner where his store was, welcoming people. And that's going to move him there. And we made it so he's movable.
That's wonderful.
And we've got him in the museum. His store's in the museum, and people walk in and they see him standing there and they think he's real. Anyway, it's awesome.
So,
I
Carmen,
ask for forgiveness, and I hope they forgive me.
I think you have absolution for eternity for everything you've done
Well,
in Washington. And we were talking about Washington, but everything you've done has been for this whole Dixie area. And you are a true embodiment of the Dixie spirit. Everything that you're talking about today, everything you're sharing is just comes from that spirit. And it's tremendous. I'm sitting here talking to someone who plants cotton every year.
well, I try. This year they cut it back, and you're not supposed to pull it out. You're supposed to cut it back, and so that's how come I have to replant it this year.
Goodness. I can't imagine a greater definition of a true Dixieite than someone who grows cotton.
Well, thank you. I love it.
Wonderful. Carmen, there's so much we could talk about. I think that a nice way to bring at least this visit to a close would be to just have you share what you feel like this Dixie spirit is and what it means to you and how you would define it.
I think the way I defined it is community. I think our Dixie spirit is community. And I think when community comes together, that Dixie spirit shows. And I think you probably feel the same way because it takes everybody to have that love. And you just look back at all the people that came before us and how they struggled and how we want to keep their legacy going. And by doing that, they had installed that Dixie spirit in us. They had to have that Dixie spirit once they got here. And it makes me so sad when people think of the word Dixie as something other than what it really is. And it really is hospitality and love. And I think that's what people that move here feel it. I really, truly think they feel it when they move here because there's something special. And that special thing is the Dixie spirit.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you for sharing this time with us and your awesome spirit.
Thank you for having me.
The Doc Booth Foundation is dedicated to empowering individuals through educational opportunities and promoting mental health advocacy. Through scholarships and funding for important community needs, the foundation perpetuates the can-do spirit of the founders of this community, using the lessons of the past to chart the course for a better future. Make your tax-deductible donation at docboothfoundation.org. Not Forgotten is produced by Ricky Valadez and made possible by the generous support of St. George Area Zag Stores, industry-leading tech support and accessories. Lyman Hafen's books can be found at lymanhafen.com.
Once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. We came to Dixie